we're setting up, I will introduce our next speaker. You have already met Helen before, Helen Fitt. I know Helen for a little while. She's been involved in the last couple of mobility symposia, and she was quite highly involved with organizing the Christchurch Symposium. In fact, her working paper will be coming out very soon in our New Zealand Aotearoa working paper series. I hope that you will notice it when we circulate that notification. Helen is a PhD candidate at Canterbury University, and she's working on the perceptions of people using transport. She is using a very interesting methodology, and the working paper will be on that. So I think you're ready to actually introduce the talk that Helen's going to give today, which is titled Between Here and Utopia, Ways to Make Everyday Transport Just a Little Better. Please welcome Helen.
Thank you, Maria. I asked one of the participants in my research, I asked Margaret, to order 4 statements that I'd given her according to how closely she thought they reflected why she drives her car to work. And she put them in this order. She said, it's habit. I don't really think about it. Was right at the top, number 1. Second, it's the most practical choice for doing what I need to do. Third, she had it fits with how I see myself. And fourth, she had I enjoy it. I then asked Margaret to imagine her ideal commute. I said she could have absolutely anything she wanted. It could be as outrageous as she wanted. Didn't have to be realistic in the slightest. So she went ahead, she told me about that, and then I said to her, do you need to reorder those statements that I gave you to make them reflect your ideal commute? And she did this. She completely reversed the order of those statements. In her ideal journey, practicality and habit became less important, and enjoying it and it fitting with how she saw herself became more important. I didn't ask all of my research participants to do this exercise. Margaret was one of my last research participants, and now I realise what a shame it is that I didn't ask everybody to do it. But I did ask everybody to describe their current commutes, and I asked most of my participants to describe their ideal commute to me. So from those, I know that Margaret isn't alone in feeling that her current commute is rather based on practicality and habit, but her ideal commute would incorporate more enjoyment and would fit better with how she sees herself. So what I want to do today is I want to try and draw out some ideas of things that people talked about around their real and ideal commutes to see if we can just think of some ways to make everyday commutes just a little bit better. And I'm going to say now, I am going to allow myself some of that same freedom that I gave Margaret. Not everything that I talk about today is going to be realistic, it's not all going to be possible. We might even have a debate around whether it's desirable or not, and I'm very open to doing that. But I think it's sometimes, and in line with the theme of the conference, it's sometimes in looking outside of where we are now that we start to think of some interesting ways to move forward. I'm going to talk today, we've had a lot of talking about cycling. I'm going to avoid cycling, but I did look into it, so if anyone has any questions, feel free to ask me at the end. I'm going to focus on motorcycling, on driving, and briefly we'll talk a bit about walking at the end. I want to start with motorbiking because I think that motorcyclists have some really interesting things to teach us about how to improve commutes. I only had 2 motorcyclists in the study, and I'm excluding for a moment people who rode scooters and mopeds because they have slightly different experiences. But both of my motorcyclists also drive cars, and when I talked to them about driving, they said that their driving is based very much on practicality and habit, as Margaret's is. When I talked to them about motorbiking, though, they talked a lot more about enjoying it and it fitting with how they see themselves. So what is it that they like about motorbiking? How is it that that connects with them in a different way? And 2 interrelated themes have particularly struck me here. One is that motorbiking is about being mindful in the moment. It's about being very connected to where you are in the present. And the other one is about being bodily and physically connected with the experience of what you're doing. And I want to read you just one quote which I think shows these 2 features really, really well together. Sunny says, you know, every little thing, you feel it more. You feel the surface of the street, you feel your surroundings, you can smell the smells, you lean into corners so you know exactly what the angle is, and you read the road much more carefully, because the bike is not that forgiving. For me, the thrill is about creating that harmony with the bike while you ride along, and this is something that you sort of have to establish in every second new, because the conditions change all the time, and that's the exciting thing about riding. And then, of course, the thrill about going around twisty bits and leaning into them, and just feel the whole centrifugal force. I just really love that. So here, Sunny talks about having to recreate the experience every second new. So there's that mindfulness, there's that being in the moment. And she talks about feeling the surfaces and smelling the smells and leaning into the corners. And so there's that bodily connection. And when I asked Chris about some of the same issues, in fact, he was talking about riding his motorbike around corners without me even really asking him about that. And the really interesting thing I noticed, we were in an interview setting in a cafe, and he started talking about riding his motorbike around twisty corners. And I'm not sure that he noticed that he was doing it, but the way that he was moving really reinforced to me how connected he is with that physical experience. And then he told me that driving his car is about 50% autopilot. And there's an amusing story that proves that we can go into later if anyone's interested. But I asked him if it's the same when he's motorbiking. And he said, no, absolutely not. When I'm motorbiking, it's a maximum of 5 or 10% autopilot, because you have to be there, focusing on what you're doing to stay safe. But also, importantly for him, to actually enjoy the experience. You have to be focused on it. To some people, that might sound a little bit stressful. But also, clearly, these motorcyclists really enjoy the experience. So I'm wondering if maybe there's something we can learn from them about being mindful and being connected to your travel that might make travel seem a little bit better. We'll come back to that in a few minutes. The things that motorcyclists didn't like about motorcycling that compromised their ability to motorbike included the practical things around carrying luggage, that was an issue, but also around the image of motorbiking not fitting with professional images, and both Sunny and Chris said they wouldn't ride their motorbikes to go and visit clients because it's just not the right image. So I think we can learn from motorcyclists. If I was looking at trying to make motorbiking easier and better, I might try to address some of those image issues. Now though, I want to move on to driving. Mark said, I think the worst thing for any driver is to just be stuck there, going nowhere. Mark doesn't actually drive. He's never driven. He doesn't have a driving license. But interestingly, most of the drivers in the study agree with him. Being stuck in traffic, at traffic lights, and roadworks at intersections sucks. Being delayed in a car journey was the single largest annoyance for the participants in this research by a long, long way. So surely, in my ideal utopian world, I would realise that people just want to get to their destinations as quickly as possible, so I'd work on reducing journey times, right? Wrong. Most of the drivers, when they talked about the frustrations of being stuck in traffic, it seems that they weren't really referring to time being wasted. They were referring to the feeling that time is being wasted, and that's actually a different thing. And to try to explore that a bit further, I asked my participants an extra little question, and I've got an animation here to help explain the question. I asked them to choose between two different routes to a destination. So these two little cars. Let's see what these cars do. So this car takes a fairly slow journey, but it's direct and it actually gets there quite quickly. This one, in contrast, it goes much faster, but it goes much further and it takes a much less direct route, and so it takes longer to get there. Any guesses which one my participants chose? Yep, you're absolutely right. They chose the one that takes more time, but is free-flowing, over the one that takes less time and has delays. And what that says to me is that it is not the length of the journey time that is the issue here. It's the feeling that time is being wasted. Has anybody ever seen one of these? Yeah. For those who haven't, this is a traffic light timer, and it tells you exactly how long you have to wait until the traffic light's going to turn green. could there be a better way of rubbing in exactly how many of those precious seconds of your life are being wasted as you sit there doing absolutely nothing?
I'm on the phone, so.
Perfect. Well, has anybody seen this? I know the picture's not brilliant. This is the Air New Zealand in-flight quiz. Perhaps designed to occupy your mind while you're bored and things seem like they're taking forever. Well, okay, so if it works, how about this? I apologise for the quality of the picture, but what I'm trying to say here is that it may not be the actual time of journey that's important. If we can deal with the feeling of the journey, then we might actually make more progress towards more enjoyable journeys, and also to drivers who are less frustrated. And I would put it out there that drivers who are less frustrated may be safer, and we may have fewer tensions on the road. I haven't come up with any really great practical and safe ways of making journeys feel like they go quicker as yet, but some of the things I've been toying with include my little traffic light quiz, sponsored, I'm sure you can't see there, but sponsored by Fairfax Media's daily trivia quiz. And I've also thought about, maybe you could have a crossword on the steering wheel that lights up when your GPS detects congestion and actually turns itself off if anything around the car moves. I'll come back to questions at the end, thank you.
Just how to do it.
Well, I was going to say if anybody's got any good ideas, that would be great. But also, maybe audio recorded lessons on mindfulness with exercises that you can do in the car while you're stuck in congestion to improve that travelling experience. But as I say, if anybody's got any suggestions, I would love to hear them at the end. But now, though, I want to move on to walking. The environment that we travel through seems to be important to most modes, but particularly to people who are walking. And I want to let Tanya explain to you some of the things that she feels about her commute. She says, it's funny because you don't really see many people walking at all, ever. And I don't really see a lot of people arriving. I mean, there's plenty of traffic, people going places, but I think the only time I ever really realised how many people work in my area was when the earthquake happened, because then they all spilled out onto the street, and suddenly the street was full of people. But I don't know, I think they must arrive in their cars and just park in the parking garages around the back, and you just never really see them on a normal day anyway. Tanya walks to work almost every day, and she went on to say that she sometimes feels isolated, different, alone, and sometimes even sort of othered, although that wasn't her word, because she's out there on her own walking. So for Tanya, I think to make the walking experience better, it might involve having more people out on the street. Now, not all walkers would agree with that. I've got one participant who likes to read a book while walking, and for him, other people on the street make that a little bit more of a challenging thing to accomplish. I asked Anna as well what she thought about walking and what her ideal walk would be. And she said, it would be cool to just walk along like a little nature strip, like, bush, and a little creek would be nice. It makes you feel, I don't know what, better than just walking along the side of a street where there's all like polluting cars going past you and stuff. And thinking about both Tanya and Anna's thoughts on this, and also reflecting on some of the recent literature that I've read, including a particularly excellent book by Colin Pooley and co called Promoting Walking and Cycling, where they talk a lot about some of the environments that people walk through. I thought, reimagining Tanya's commute, I can just see a picture of office buildings and the backs of shops, so the back entrances to those buildings. And instead of having the parking garages underneath or right outside, they're a couple of 100 metres away. And in Christchurch, that's not actually that unfeasible at the moment to change some of the things like that in some places. And between the backs of the buildings and the parking, we've got Anna's little path with the nature strip on one side. We've got the creek on the other side, perhaps a creek that's there anyway, but is normally buried under the streets through drainage canals. And we've maybe got a little bridge that goes over the creek. But for those who want to be a bit more adventurous, a bit more playful, a bit more embodiedly connected with their travel, maybe we've got stepping stones instead. And personally, I'd have little pockets amongst the vegetation where in the morning you could have coffee carts and sandwich sellers, and in the evening maybe you could have fresh fruit and veg stalls and things like that. And what I'd do to crown it off, I'd add star path. Star path is a new paving material that uses photoluminescent particles to make it glow in the dark. I think it would add novelty, I think it would be cool. I think if we had that kind of thing, we've got a very good chance of getting some of those people who drive to the parking garages out of their cars just for a very short amount of the commute home, and it would make it busier, and it might make Tanya feel a little bit happier. I've had fun playing with some of these ideas, thinking about people's real journeys and their ideals, and how we might jokingly make transport just a little bit better. But I've also been trying to make some quite serious points about enjoyment, about mindfulness, about embodiment, about the passing of time, and about the environments that we travel through. And I would encourage you to think about these things during your journeys, because if we can make transport just a little bit better, partly as a result of my PhD, then that would be a massive success.